Sorry, I didn't see you there. How would I like to work in 2020? I'd like to work in a world where information is no longer need to know, but free to know, so we can help drive innovation.
I would like to work in an environment where the information you need is available to hand, and your location and technology do not limit your ability to communicate with others.
I want to work in an environment where security measures let me use the right tools for the job with confidence, rather than prevent me from doing the job at all.
I would like to work in an environment where security and technology are enablers and not barriers.
I would like collaborative working to be supported by technology that is easy to set up, easy to use, and is supported by a culture that embraces new technologies as soon as they're released.
I would like to work in a collaborative environment where duplication of content and effort are less common, and where I can find what I need to know when I need to know it.
I'd like to work in an environment where collaboration happens instantaneously. The security is here too, but not obtrusive, and where information is shared between trusted partners without the fear of IP being compromised.
I would like to work in an environment in which everybody can use and understand collaborative technology to the same level. Generation is not a barrier.
I would like to work in a collaborative environment where all of my energy can be focused on the task at hand, rather than wasting effort facilitating information sharing or finding workarounds for communications issues.
I'd like to be able to easily access data and share work to increase its wider benefit and reduce duplication of effort.
Okay, so we are the so-called digital natives, and at the start of this year, UKCeB put out a call-in notice across the defence industry for digital natives to come together and work to answer these questions. So, how do we want to work in 2020, and what can help us achieve those visions? It's widely accepted now that sort of social medias and digital technologies are an integral part of how we do business. But in the defence industry, we've got a particular challenge in that everything that we adopt must have that element of security. For the purpose of this study, we've acknowledged that limitation, but we have taken a broadly blue sky approach. And as Richard mentioned, any burning questions or comments, please send them to #DM2020, and I'll bring them up later. So, faced with the challenge of looking towards 2020, we structured this around a timeline. So we've got 2013 over here because it's always used to set a benchmark so that we can measure progress. And then we'll be moving over to 2020 to discuss our visions for that sort of year. And we've broken that down into 3 themes that came quite naturally to the subject, and those are collaboration, culture and technology. So I'll just pass you over to David now to talk about 2013.
Hi, David Longworth, one of the digital natives as well. I'm here to talk about 2013 and our view of 2013. So what we'd just quite like to share is a couple of, frustrations that we tend to have around life in 2013. First of all, looking at internal collaboration. So in between businesses, teleconferencing is a very good way of actually getting some face-to-face interaction with people during a meeting, which means that your meeting actually progresses better. However, often, internal to our companies, we can find it's quite time-consuming to set up, not necessarily intuitive to the user. And also, simply getting a place where you can have a teleconference is often quite difficult. Technically, we can also do we can have all our documentation on shared drives. This isn't anything new. But there are still individuals around the place which often you note that they haven't put the latest thing onto the shared drive. You can't get access to what they've put on there. So all the information that's on there isn't actually up to date. It isn't what you want to see. And also, I'm sure that people can share the frustration of waiting for access to a shared drive when you've just moved on to the project. If we move towards more inter-company collaboration, the use of segregated systems, so between each project where you've got several companies working on it, often you'll have a separate system set up for each one of those projects. Each of those separate systems has to be incredibly secure for obvious reasons, but this often leads on to having a significant number of different logon usernames and passwords for all those separate systems, and none of those talk to each other, despite the fact that you're still the same person using them, just wearing different hats. So this brings us on to our next frustration on password policies, which typically look like something up there. and there are an awful lot of them to remember, and often the sheer quantity of them can lead to detrimental ways in which people look after them to actually affect our security. So this leads nicely into the underlying remit here about security policy, and the fact that we often find that the security policy seems like it is unwilling to adapt to how technology is progressing. But also, it actually lends itself to giving an unwillingness to adapt within the actual people who could change it and could actually alter that culture. So I'll just leave you with those thoughts. And we started to do a benchmarking exercise. And the 4 things that we wanted to address here, which are what these questions aim to do among our companies, was to say, how open is your internet access currently? How much access do you have to the new social media, i.e. the new way of trying to communicate? How open is your company to actually collaborating internally and externally? How much do you think of it? But then also, how well do you embed new technologies? So are you open to using them, or are you open to embedding? And the results are quite interesting. So if we take a look at the results, we'll work clockwise around this. You can see that actually we have pretty open access to the internet, so all the security issues there seem to be resolved. Typically things you don't have access to are blogging websites. But moving around, you can see that actually we haven't picked up on using this new communication method in terms of social media, forums, blogging, posting. But what's quite interesting is that actually we still do take our attitude towards sharing internally and sharing with our partners very, very seriously. But we haven't utilised this new tool that's available. And if you move up to the top there, you can see that this isn't because we're not open to trying new technology. We're very open to trying all this new tech. But all the companies seem to have a significant time lag in actually amending the processes to implementing this technology, which is where we feel that means we get left behind on actually taking up the new technologies that are out there. So I'm going to move back now and pass back to Rebecca, who's going to tell us about the rosy vision for the future.
Alright then, so to 2020, 7 years in the future. What we've done is we've created a word cloud for each of the themes that we've been working around. We're just each going to draw out a few of the keywords that have come from that. So collaboration then. And within that word cloud, we've got some words that we'd all expect in there, sort of common, task, tools. But the ones that I'm going to pull out are the largest, the most common, and that's the participants and how they share information. So to information. In 2020, this needs to be easy to locate and easy to access. So rather than drowning in a sea of emails with large attachments and signposts to various shared drives, what we could have is access to all relevant information through a single channel. And having that sort of ability to browse all relevant information would have the knock-on effect of increasing trust within collaborative partnerships. And that brings me nicely to shared. So the sharing of information, of knowledge and of ideas. Why can't we be able to sort of tag someone in, or a group of people or part of a project in some work that I'm doing to increase the contributions, increase the scope for comments and ideas and largely generate an innovative culture there. And this again could empower individuals to contribute. Traditionally they'd be blocked by hierarchical boundaries. And then that brings me to participants. So the need to work with the right people at the right time without having to be in the same office. I think we're taking steps to that in the moment, but it's about increasing that so that communications are more instantaneous and direct. To be able to work simultaneously on documents without having to be in the same room, which is how we've created this presentation actually. But we will show you more of that in a bit. And then, as was mentioned earlier, the resource pool. So the idea here would be to have the whole of team defence in a single resource pool, so that I could search for a subject matter expert in the same way that I would search for an old friend So to a greater or lesser extent, I think it's safe to say that everybody uses social media in their social lives. But by 2020, we want everyone to have an established professional use for those technologies. Yes, there needs to be a clear distinction between the private and professional uses, but I don't think that they should be impermeable, so people can switch between the two domains. But that they're setting the boundaries for that to maintain a secure environment will largely come down to how we control the culture and amend that organisational culture. So that brings us on back to David.
So when we first took up this challenge, we as you can see, we distributed it into these three categories now as we're part of the culture working group. And one thing we actually identified is that often we work very heavily on the technology, how technology can help us actually collaborate better. But one thing that we sometimes focus on a bit less is, okay, well, how do we engage that culture to actually encourage the culture to use the new technology we are developing? So at our stand, there's a good pamphlet which summarises everything that we concluded after we looked at these three things. So please grab it and have a read. And this word was created from the culture section of that, and is our vision for the future. And again, I'll be focusing on the largest ideas and the most interesting ones that we kind of pulled out. The first one of these is this idea of openness. There's always talk about need to know, need to share, and these kind of things. And I think in terms of some of the new technologies that are actually being brought out, there's a different culture attached to them, which is this idea of being open with your ideas, being open with what you know, being open with who you can share it with this idea of simulating more ideas from other people around the place. And this is a very different tack to how we control like email chains and those kind of activities. So there is a big cultural push there to actually do it. And again, building on kind of what I shared with the frustrations, there's got to be an openness to embracing new technology and actually embracing it quickly. So an openness to our procedural change on that case. And this sort of leads nicely into, but how can we trust that to happen? And I think that again is something which we have to put trust in the security solutions we can put in place. But also in the case of, say, having access to blogging websites for actual personal use, trust the individuals to actually behave professionally with the tools that you give them. And on the individual point, when you're sharing your ideas and all these kind of things, trust that the credit for those ideas will actually go to you. And again, that's a bit of cultural training that has to go out amongst companies, which smoothly brings us on again to this idea of individuals. This whole cultural change, in order to allow us to use new technologies, in order to allow us to collaborate better, will be driven by individuals. But those individuals need to have some guidance on how they can actually take part and do it themselves. But also they need to know that if they are sharing everything that they know and everything that they can bring to the party, that they will actually get recognition for what they have brought that's highly collaborative and highly team objective oriented environment. So how does the technology help those individuals do that? For that, I'll pass on to Jamie.
Hi, I'm Jamie and I'm going to be talking about the technology aspects of this. So as David mentioned before, these wordles were produced using the information that we put together as part of it. And this technology slide is part of the handout that we do have available on our stall. So please feel free to come and grab one or ask us any questions about them. So you can see that the wordle really picks out some of the key points that we need to look at. And the first one of those in terms of technology that I want to talk about is data. Data is clearly something very important when it comes to collaboration. It's the data that we create, the data that we want to share with each other, and also the data that we need to protect. Which really brings us on to the second point of security. Now, in a collaborative environment, we want to be able to share things easily, but we also need to make sure that we do so in a secure manner. And that's often quite hard to do because you don't really know who's going to keep hold of that data or where it's going to go. So security is really something big that's come out of everything that we've looked at. And the final point is the cloud. Now the cloud, I'm sure most of you are already aware of what it is, but we see the cloud being a big thing in the future of collaboration in the way that things are shared. and security has a big hit here because it's very difficult to secure the cloud. But we hope that coming towards 2020, that may not be the case, and technology will have really come a long way there. But what I will do now is I'll talk about the technology that we've looked at in this study and what we would like to see in the future. Now, we found that collaborating amongst the teams was actually fairly difficult. There's a lot of technology out there already, and it's really very strong technology, but in our current workplaces we weren't able to use them as we would have liked. So a lot of the collaboration that we did during this project we had to do outside of working hours using Wi-Fi connections and our own devices. And one of the things that we used primarily was Google+, which is a very good collaborative environment. Now, looking forward to the future, we really think that the cloud is going to have a very strong basis here. Now, clearly at the moment, collaborative environments, if they're in your personal domain, they're easily secured and you have complete control over what happens to them. And moving forward and sharing with all the companies involved in team defence, we feel that the cloud will be a perfect place for that to happen. But it obviously has various security concerns around it. And we expect these things to be answered better coming towards 2020. But it's concerns such as who owns your data, where the data is kept, what countries' laws apply to the data. And as I said, hopefully going forward we'll have a better idea of how that is dealt with. Now, bring your own device was mentioned earlier this morning, and we feel that coming into 2020 this is really something that is going to be much more widespread. Company employees are beginning to want to bring their own devices to use for work because quite often they're much more up to date than the technology that is provided in the workplace. And companies are having to change their policies and procedures to cater for this. Now, obviously there's big security concerns surrounding that, but the main benefit that we see going forward is that if people are using their own personal devices, it means that they're much more accessible. So they could be accessing their company's data from wherever they are, provided they have internet access. Obviously, the security concerns around that are high, and that's something that will need to be dealt with. Now, social networks we've looked at fairly in quite a big way. This talks about your local social networks, your company enterprise social networks, or equally the globally available public social networks. Now, the first ones I talked about, clearly they're easily protected and you have complete control over the data that is stored on them. But the problem you have there is that it limits collaboration between companies. And the opposite you have there is that the publicly available social networks, whilst they're globally available and they make everything really accessible, you have the issue that you have no control over any of the data. So going forward, we think the ideal solution will be something which sits in the middle of the two. So you have a social network which sits on a cloud, but something that's secure enough so that you're securing the idea that your data will be stored safely and not misused. And finally, telepresence. Now, video conferencing is used more and more frequently at the moment, but teleconferencing, which was sort of the predecessor, has its own issues. It's very difficult to really gauge how people are interacting to what you say, and indeed, you often find that people are talking over and above each other, and it's very difficult to control. Telepresence is something that's really coming to the fore now, and we feel that coming to 2020, it'll be much more mature. But you can see here there's an example of the Halo telepresence. And the benefit of this is that you really get an idea that the people that you're actually collaborating with are essentially in the room with you, although they could in fact be halfway across the world. So we think that the benefits that this provide are really going to break down the barriers of collaboration in the future. So I'm now going to pass you back to David, who's going to talk about where these technologies would sit in a project lifecycle, and he'll talk you through a case study of how we've worked on this project.
So we thought that was all great, but it was quite disjointed. So what we tried to do is pull it together and actually show where all this fitted in to the bit which, as industry, we're all interested in, which is how does this help us deliver something. So we put up an incredibly simplified project lifecycle, which we hope will be applicable to any project that we're trying to do, which is it just has a concept. It has some form of delivery, whether that's delivering development, whether it's delivering a product, whether it's delivering a service, doesn't matter, it's just delivering something. And then there's a stage after that where you archive it, where if you want to do this again at some point in the future, you can get at all that information and you can do it again quicker, better, faster. So where do all the technologies fit in? Let's have a quick zoom through. In the concept phase, this comes back to this idea of being openness. We want all the ideas out there. We want to understand the positives and negatives and the complete disasters that have happened before. We want to understand everything about it. So this idea of social networks where everyone's an equal and they can all post their ideas and they're all taken on board at the same level is a really powerful device. And also, if this is actually stored somewhere, say on the cloud or through different forums, this means that all that information is continuously up to date. So you're actually always getting the latest opinions from everybody who's working in your collaborative team. And this was kind of how we did our concept phase. There was an awful lot of ideas that were thrown out there, and then we just tried to pull things out as we went through. As we moved into the delivery, so actually writing our documentation that you can get on a stand, or actually making this presentation, we moved into a slightly different tool set. One of these was the actual collaborative documentation. So this removes the need for email chains or document chains, because you're actively working on a document which continuously saves itself, and it also stores every step in the document as it's been changed. And you can all work on it at the same time. We'll just show you a quick example of this. One thing that we found very useful for while we were doing this was the ability to have our own, I guess, instant telepresences through our webcams, which are readily available on most of our devices. And as we said previously, because we were all from different industries, we were actually having to do this outside of the work infrastructure on our bring your own devices, which made life a lot easier in that respect. So if we move into archive, and this is the really interesting one, you don't really have to do anything if you've used all the other stuff, because it's all saved there and it's all searchable, it's all stored. The only things you might have to do is actually look at it and try and segment it slightly better, defragment it slightly. But in reality, if you've got a decent search engine, that can be done for you as you search through it. So, how did we use all this stuff? And here's setting up an instance setting was pretty simple. Just to do a quick catch up on my activities as well. And here's a quick example of what we're talking about in terms of collaborative documentation, which is the way that we actually wrote everything that's on our stand. How the two technologies are working together, and you're able to chat and typing, you can take different parts of the document, and you can actually see the effect that your changes make on the whole document. You can see what we're talking about ideas being posted, actually seeing what people like and what they don't like. And here's one of the iterations of our presentation. You can see several people working on it, knowing what changes they're making and how it affects everything else. And on that incredibly smooth transition, I'll pass back to Rebecca for our recommendations.
Right,
then, so off the back of what we've been talking about, we've come up with 3 sort of takeaway points, things that we think our industry should be working on over the next 7 years to sort of get to where we want to be in 2020. The first one is the adoption of cloud-based working, working out how we can secure that to meet our needs. Secondly, a sort of a common digital collaborative platform that's with compatibility across the industry, so your larger companies and your SMEs can all access that. And a commitment to training and trust, and this is about the organisational culture and getting everybody who's maybe stuck in how we've done things in the past, just getting them looking forward. And just as a takeaway point, a lot of social medias, that's traditionally is a sort of a bottom-up type development in a lot of the commercial world. In our industry, how we work is very restrictive, and so I think what we need to do is foster that environment to take the first steps to encourage people to use these types of things in a collaborative way. But it's not going to be taken up without that sort of initial encouragement. And if you've got any questions outside of the Q&A, just come and chat to us. There's a few more of us on the stand outside.